In Colombia, they don't make criminals. They make survivors. And some survivors become warlords. In 1966, in the forgotten mountains of Antioquia, Colombia, Daniel Rendón Herrera was born into a family drowning in poverty, one child among 14. The rural outskirts of Amalfi weren't just poor, they were abandoned. No government, no infrastructure, no future. Just guerrillas in the hills and fear in every home. His father worked the land until his hands bled. His mother watched her children grow up hungry. But in that house of 14 siblings, 2 brothers would rise from nothing and become legends written in blood. Daniel and his brother Freddy, later known as El Alemán, the German, grew up alongside the Castaño brothers, Fidel, Carlos, and Vicente. These weren't just neighbors, they were the future architects of Colombia's longest nightmare. While other kids played, Daniel watched. While others dreamed, he calculated. Antioquia in the 1970s wasn't a place for dreamers. It was a place where you either became invisible or you became something the world couldn't ignore. And Daniel Rendón Herrera chose the second path. In the 1980s, both Daniel and Freddy started at the bottom of Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, the empire that ruled Colombia's underworld like a dark god. They weren't bosses, they were foot soldiers. Invisible hands moving powder, collecting debts, silencing problems. But while others chased money, Daniel studied the system. He learned that in Colombia, power didn't come from being the loudest, it came from being the most necessary. While the Rendón brothers worked for Escobar, the Castaño brothers were building something else, a paramilitary self-defense force to protect their community from guerrilla attacks around Amalfi. The leftist FARC guerrillas had been terrorizing rural Colombia for decades, kidnapping ranchers, extorting farmers, burning villages. The government did nothing, so the people armed themselves, and the Castaños became their generals. When Escobar became too dangerous, the Castaños, with backing from the rival Cali cartel, formed a hit squad called Los Pepes to hunt him down. Daniel and his brother joined them. In December 1993, Escobar was killed on a Medellin rooftop. The king was dead, and the soldiers who killed him inherited his empire. Don Mario and the Pepes took over part of Escobar's stuff trafficking network and used the money to fuel their war against the FARC. What started as self-defense became a business. What began as protection became conquest. They weren't fighting for their villages anymore. They were fighting for territory, roots, and billions. The line between hero and monster had disappeared, and Daniel Rendón Herrera was standing right where it used to be. In 1995, Daniel and Freddy formed their own paramilitary unit, the Elmer Cardenas Bloc, and joined the Castaños umbrella organization, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, the AUC. Founded in 1997, the AUC was designated by the United States in 2001 as a foreign terrorist organization. But to the Colombian government, they were a necessary evil. They did what the military couldn't or wouldn't do. They hunted guerrillas. They cleared territory. They imposed order through fear. Daniel became second in command of the Elmer Cardenas Bloc, right behind his brother Freddy, who earned the nickname El Alemán for his obsession with military discipline. Freddy was the commander, but Daniel was the mind. He didn't need to scream orders or fire guns. He built systems. He calculated routes. He made alliances. While his brother led armies, Daniel ran the business behind them. The AUC imposed taxes on powder, trafficked through their controlled areas, and engaged in violent attacks, including murders and kidnappings. It wasn't just about ideology anymore. It was about money. Tons of powder moved through their territory every week, and every gram paid tribute to the AUC. They became the toll collectors of Colombia's underworld, and they collected in blood. Some of Colombia's most gruesome massacres were caused by AUC members, displacing tens of thousands of Colombians. Entire villages wiped out, families burned alive, bodies left on roadsides as warnings. The message was always the same: obey or vanish. While Freddy stayed in Antioquia fighting guerrillas and protecting stuff routes, Daniel went to central Colombia to become the finance chief of the Centauros Bloc, created to overtake powder-rich FARC territory in Meta and Guaviare provinces. He wasn't a warrior anymore. He was an executive, a CEO of violence, and his product was terror packaged as order. By the early 2000s, the AUC controlled more territory than the Colombian government. And Daniel Rendón Herrera, still barely known to the world, had become one of the most powerful men in the shadows. Then, the government decided to make a deal. By 2006, many members of the AUC demobilized as part of Colombia's justice and peace process, a deal where paramilitary members would surrender to the government and give up their assets in exchange for reduced sentences and amnesty from extradition to the United States. Daniel and his brother demobilized in 2006 as members of the Elmer Cardenas bloc, one of the last to do so under the 2005 treaty with President Alvaro Uribe. Thousands of fighters turned in their weapons. Leaders confessed their crimes. The war, it seemed, was over. But Daniel Rendón Herrera didn't believe in peace. He believed in patterns, and the pattern was clear. The government was lying. President Uribe violated the agreement, and in May 2008, extradited the demobilized AUC leadership to the United States, including Diego Murillo Bejarano, known as Berna. The men who had surrendered in good faith were shipped off to American prisons. The deal was a trap, and Daniel had seen it coming. Rather than submit to the peace process, Rendón Herrera remobilized the AUC under a new name. He called it Los Urabeños. Later, it became Clan Usuga. Then, Clan del Golfo, the Gulf Clan. But the name didn't matter. The system was the same. The violence was the same. The business was the same. Around that time, Mario formally announced the founding of the AGC, Gaitanista Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, for which he had been recruiting since 2006. While others believed in peace, Daniel had been preparing for war, and now he had an army waiting. He created an organization called Heroes of Castaño, in honor of his childhood friend, Carlos Castaño Gil, the AUC's top commander. He took command of 400 men in the Urabá region and controlled the stuff traffic through alliances made with the guerrillas. The irony was brutal. The man who once hunted guerrillas now worked with them. Ideology meant nothing. Only territory and profit mattered. The group overpowered Los Paisas, a paramilitary-aligned crew founded by Berna, taking control of routes and territory previously held by extradited AUC commanders along the Caribbean coast and in Urabá and the Pacific coast. Daniel didn't need to announce his return. Bodies did it for him. The ghost was back. And this time, he was unkillable. By the time of his recapture, Daniel Rendón Herrera was the founder and one of the principal leaders of Clan Usuga, also referred to as Los Urabeños, the largest and most influential criminal gang in Colombia. The Gulf Clan wasn't just a cartel. It was a parallel state. They had soldiers, territory, politicians, and judges on payroll. They controlled ports, airports, and border towns. They were invisible and everywhere. The CDG financed their operations by imposing a tax on multi-ton shipments of powder that transited through areas they controlled, more than 80 tons of powder, ultimately destined for the United States. Every kilo moved through their land paid tribute. Every shipment, every route, every dealer. It was a business model so efficient that it made billions. And Daniel ran it like a Fortune 500 company. By 2009, when Rendón Herrera was captured, he commanded 16 blocs, or territories, across Colombia, and thousands of armed paramilitary fighters. He controlled more land than most governors. He had more soldiers than most generals. And he answered to no one. The CDG employed sicarios, or hitmen, who carried out various acts of violence, including murders, assaults, kidnappings, and assassinations to collect debts, maintain discipline, control, and expand territory, and to promote the prestige, reputation, and position of the organization. They didn't just kill enemies, they killed families. They killed witnesses. They killed anyone who even thought about betraying them. In 2009, just before he was caught, Don Mario offered a $1,000 reward to anyone who killed a police officer. It wasn't just a bounty, it was a declaration. He was telling the government, "You can't stop me, I own the streets." Dozens of cops were gunned down, towns shut down, fear spread like wildfire. And at the center of it all was a man who rarely raised his voice, never carried a gun, and controlled everything with a phone call. Daniel Rendón Herrera had become what Colombia feared most. A ghost you couldn't kill, a system you couldn't dismantle, a monster who looked like a businessman, but even ghosts leave footprints. On April 15, 2009, Daniel Rendón Herrera was captured while hiding in a jungle in Antioquia. After a 9-month manhunt, Colombian police tracked him down in his home region. The defense minister at the time, Juan Manuel Santos, said Don Mario was found in his underwear, eating rice from a plate, like a dog, the most feared man in Colombia, reduced to an animal in hiding. The symbolism was intentional. The government wanted the world to see him as pathetic, broken, finished. But they were wrong. Don Mario wasn't broken. He was calculating. Even from a Colombian prison cell, he still had power. His network didn't collapse. His empire didn't fall. The Gulf clan continued operating, stronger than before, because Daniel Rendón Herrera had built something bigger than himself. He had built a system. And systems don't die when one man falls. For 9 years, he sat in Colombian prisons. Lawyers fought his extradition. Politicians debated his fate. Meanwhile, his organization kept moving powder, kept killing enemies, kept expanding. The throne was empty, but the kingdom remained. And the Americans were waiting. On April 23, 2018, Daniel Rendón Herrera was extradited from Colombia to the United States. The ghost who had evaded justice for decades was finally shipped to Brooklyn, New York, to face charges in a federal court. When translators stated his not guilty plea, Don Mario was still wearing the same Adidas hoodie and track pants he had on when he got off the plane. No designer suits, no bravado, just a man who knew his story was ending. Prosecutors compared Rendón Herrera's rule to that of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the former boss of the infamous Mexican Sinaloa cartel, who was also extradited to Brooklyn to face federal charges the year before. Two legends, two empires, two men who turned violence into industry. Both ended up in the same Brooklyn courtroom, stripped of power, surrounded by prosecutors reciting their sins. In November 2021, Daniel Rendón Herrera pleaded guilty to engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise and conspiring to provide material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization. The trial was over. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified. Documents were presented. Recordings played. The world heard stories of kidnappings, torture, assassinations, and billions in blood money. Rendón Herrera also admitted to having trafficked more than 80 tons of powder as part of his billion-dollar empire. 80 tons, not kilos, tons. Enough to flood entire cities, enough to destroy millions of lives, enough to make him one of the most prolific traffickers in history. On October 17, 2022, Daniel Rendón Herrera was sentenced by United States District Judge Dora L. Irizarry to 35 years imprisonment for engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise as a leader of the Clan del Golfo, and 15 years imprisonment for conspiring to provide material support to the AUC. The sentences will run concurrently. As part of the sentence, the court ordered Rendón Herrera to pay $45,750,000 in forfeiture. 35 years. At 57 years old, that meant Daniel Rendón Herrera would likely die in an American prison. Prosecutor Brian Peace said the sentence marks the end of the criminal career of Rendón Herrera, once the most feared narco-terrorist in Colombia. The ghost was finally buried. The monster was caged. The system had won. Or had it. In 2022, Colombia extradited the alleged head of the Gulf clan, Dairo Antonio Usuga David, who had been the country's most wanted kingpin before his capture, to the United States. Colombian President Iván Duque said Usuga is comparable only to Pablo Escobar. Another legend. Another monster. Another man who inherited Daniel's throne. The Gulf clan shut down dozens of towns in northern Colombia for 4 days in retaliation for the extradition. They didn't just protest, they paralyzed the country. Buses burned, roads blocked, police stations attacked. The message was clear. We are still here, and we are stronger than ever. Because Daniel Rendón Herrera didn't just build a cartel. He built a culture. He built a system where violence and business fused into something unstoppable. He showed poor kids in forgotten towns that they didn't need the government. They didn't need hope. They just needed loyalty, guns, and powder. And that lesson didn't die with him. Today, the Gulf clan is still one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. They still control routes. They still tax shipments. They still kill anyone who gets in their way. Don Mario is gone, but his blueprint remains. And someone else is already following it. Today, Daniel Rendón Herrera sits in an American prison, stripped of power, cut off from the world, forgotten by most. No tunnels, no escapes, no phone calls, just silence and concrete. The man who once commanded armies now counts the hours in a cell. But in Colombia, his name is still whispered. In Antioquia, his legend endures. In the mountains where he was born, they still talk about the boy who became a warlord, the ghost who built an empire, the monster who ruled through fear and respect. DEA special agent said Don Mario was the most feared narco-terrorist in Colombia, known as the old man who ignited Clan Usaga's reign of terror while besieging the United States with hundreds of tons of powder. But here's the truth. Daniel Rendón Herrera wasn't born a monster. He was born into a country that abandoned him. A country where the government couldn't protect its people, where guerrillas ruled the hills, where poverty crushed dreams before they could form. He didn't invent violence. He perfected it. He didn't create the system. He just learned to play it better than anyone else. U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration agents described him as one of the most prolific traffickers to ever operate in Colombia. Not because he was the most brutal, not because he was the loudest, but because he understood something others didn't. In a failed state, the man who brings order, even bloody order, becomes a king. And for 2 decades, Daniel Rendón Herrera was a king. Now he's just a number in a prison ledger. But his empire? It's still out there, still moving powder, still killing enemies, still proving that in Colombia, you can kill a man, but you can't kill what he built. Some men fight monsters, some men become them, but a few build systems so strong that even when they fall, the monsters keep coming. Don Mario didn't just run a cartel. He became the blueprint for every warlord who came after. And in Colombia, they're still following his map.